Following that announcement about support bubbles yesterday, we're joined by Nick Ferrari and Nicola Thorp to discuss all the latest. Good morning to both of you. Nick, I imagine you've been talking about this a lot on your radio show this morning. So for anybody that doesn't quite understand what these support bubbles are, how does it work?
OK, and so that I get it absolutely right, and good morning to you both, this means that adults who live alone, and I am reading apologies, or single-parent families can form a support bubble, as you both rightly say, with another household. Two households, though, with more than one adult cannot unite, but it will give millions of families the chance to form what are called wider households and, of course, grandparents to see their grandchildren. But you've nailed it, and Holly, you refer to the radio show. There is concern because people are ringing up and saying, for instance, I had a call, one person who had two daughters, literally, which one does she choose? Or someone else who has, their parents are divorced, their in-laws are not. So that's now three households. It's very easy to be negative, and it's almost a national pastime now to carp. The government are doing what they can. Let's look at the positives. There will be millions of grandparents who can hug their grandchildren for the first time in 3 months. That is undoubtedly a positive, but there's still a degree of confusion. But I imagine as we emerge into whatever the new normal is, this is what's going to occur. And
yeah, to continue running with that point, it's relatively easy to lock a place down. It is difficult and complicated and multifaceted to begin to release it. Nobody can get that absolutely right, and there will always be different interpretations of the rules. And is that something that your listeners have been talking about?
Very much so. And I also have to say, and this isn't the government's fault, but these things, and by and large, I think the great British public, Phillip, have been really good, Holly. They really have respected. But they have problems when they look at some of the demonstrations that we've seen through the weekend, not with the spirit of the demonstrations, they're with that. But these people, obviously, they're not observing social distancing. And yet a grandma says, I haven't seen my granddaughter for 3 months, but I turn on the TV and other people are going to, or are going in the park or are doing whatever they do. These rules only work if people abide by them, and that's the sensitive point we are now.
Nicola, I wanted to ask what you think about this, because, you know, for a grandparent to come and see their grandchildren at a time when some primary school children are going back to school, so mixing with teachers and other families, I guess, parents could be going to work, socially distancing, yes, but does it not just open them up, these sort of vulnerable members of society, up to all sorts of things?
Of course it does. And I've been living on my own since the beginning of lockdown, and the household that I want to join is my family, who are up north in Blackpool, but they're shielding my grandma. So I'm going to not combine into a bubble until there's further government advice on people who have been shielding, people who are vulnerable, because they are the people that I want to see more than anything. And I understand what Nick's saying about the demonstrators at the weekend. I was one of them. I did wear protective clothing, etc., masks and gloves. And as a result of that, I am self-isolating now for the next 2 weeks. I think that there are a lot of responsible people who were at the demonstrations who knew that as a consequence of attending, they then had to be super, super careful in the following 2 weeks, because the last thing we want is for anybody to be blamed for a second wave because of those demonstrations. So I think people, you know, are using their common sense and are being sensible with those kinds of things.
And Nicola, Neil Ferguson, who sat on the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, which is, we've all now come to know that as SAGE, during the early stages of the outbreak, he is not there anymore, but said that if we had started lockdown a week earlier, we could have reduced the UK coronavirus deaths by half.
It's tragic to hear, isn't it? I was thinking about this a lot this morning, and I was listening to Nick's show, and it occurred to me that with other kind of natural disasters that can affect countries, if you heard that there was a hurricane on its way, you wouldn't wait for the hurricane to arrive to start putting up protection on your houses. You would probably, I mean, one would hope that you would put up that protection before finding out how bad it was. And unfortunately now we're asking these very, very difficult questions. And a lot of people might say, oh, it's too soon to know, but I think we should be asking these questions as we move along so that we can be better informed for the next stages of lockdown. But it's absolutely tragic to think that just 1 week could have saved, what, nearly 30,000 lives so far, and also probably reduce the amount of time that we were in lockdown. I think it's really upsetting that now scientists and government are being pitted against each other when they should actually be able to hold their hands up and say, yes, we made a mistake and be culpable for that.
I was going to say, I mean, I guess the thing is here, Neil Ferguson, did he mention this at the time? Would he have mentioned that he believed that lockdown should have been a week earlier? Was he saying this? Did the government not listen, or did he not mention it, but he's mentioning it now and therefore it's not very helpful?
For the purpose of balance, and let me put that out there and your viewers can decide, for the purpose of balance, the government has said this morning that they had been guided by the advice all the way along the line. If you recall, on March the 16th, the lockdown was effectively voluntary. That's what the Prime Minister asked for. That would have put us in line with, we didn't go as far as, but had that worked, it would have put us in line with other European countries of voluntary lockdown. It didn't work, as we know, in that famous address on March the 23rd when the lockdown was put in place. So the government would say they have followed the scientific and the medical advice all the way along the line. We've been playing clips today. That is very much what the case was. And I hear what Nicola says. All I would say is that because it's such a fast-moving situation, that there are probably elements we don't even know yet. Let's have one all-encompassing inquiry that will look at this, that will look at provision of PPE, that will look at care homes, that will look at everything, rather than pick off items bit by bit. But Nicola's right. There are many questions to answer.
And obviously there is confusion about schools, and Education Secretary Gavin Williamson has set to reveal the massive catch-up operation and recovery plan next week. Reports have suggested that a volunteer army of retired teachers could be deployed to help kids catch up in summer school.
One thing I think we can all agree on is how brilliantly the National Health Service rallied and was treated. And we had doctors and we had nurses who came back and from retirement. And we had the provision of the Nightingale hospitals, which was put together by the extraordinary brilliance of our armed forces. And it looks like, thank the Lord, the NHS has been saved, and now it's actually trying to catch up with people with serious conditions such as cancer and kidney complaints. I just wonder if we couldn't shift all of that incredible personnel, that incredible spirit that did so well with health. Wouldn't it be great now to switch it to education, to possibly use some of the Nightingale hospitals or village halls or community halls or whatever, or even in some instances council offices, in all honesty, or sports halls, to get the people in there and to possibly look at, and teachers have worked through, let's get that straight, Phillip and Holly, Pete, many teachers have worked through this period, but perhaps some retired teachers to do a bit of a bridge over some of the summer weeks to help some of those kids.
Nicola?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a lot of unemployed people at the moment. Obviously, DBS or CRB checks would be needed as well as. But there's lots of people who would, I'm sure, want to volunteer their time in order to help kids get back into school, to not have those massive classroom numbers. And I think it's just so important, not just for the kids to obviously get back into education, but to start socialising again, because I think further down the line, in years to come, I think children will probably be suffering the psychological effects of missing their mates for such a long period of time. So yeah, the sooner they can get back into some semblance of social normality, the better.
Just quickly on this final point, Chris Whitty was a barrel of laughs, warned yesterday that we could be facing another peak in winter as the virus will have certain advantages. We could have a winter lockdown. Is it right to be, because we're seeing green shoots of some sort of recovery here, mentally we're all thinking, right, OK, maybe we've got through the worst of it and maybe the doors are beginning to open just a little bit. Oh, hang on a second, another catastrophe on the way. Are we right to be warned about that when we don't know?
Well, it's not for me to... It's not for me to gainsay the chief medical officer. But Phillip, I totally agree with you. There's a story today that many people in this country, when the non-essential shops open on Monday, there is more fear in this country than other European countries such as Netherlands, Sweden and Germany. People will not go shopping. Can I implore people, obviously as long as it's safe, if you're not vulnerable, we have to go shopping. In the last 15 minutes, it's been announced that the furlough bill is £19.8 billion, double what it was expected to be. We have to get the country moving. We actually have to go shopping. So you're absolutely right. Talk of a second wave sometime in the future. Let's get over this one and let's get some cash in the till.
Nicola?
Yeah, I totally agree with Nick. I think it's good to bear in mind that things could get worse again in the future so that we can enjoy and adhere to the rules as strictly as possible right now. I think it's better to be mentally prepared for what is going to happen in the future. And hey, if it doesn't happen, then it's better off for all of us.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.